live, and we're gonna get communication, how to apply webinar started. So the staff and I were taking a poll. Can anyone else outside of state government hear the doorbell ring when folks join us? Okay, so Todd Fortune is raising his hand. We were just curious. We are officially recording now. We're gonna go ahead and start the 2022 VATI How to Apply webinar. So good afternoon. For all of you who don't know who I am Tamara Holmes, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of the Office of Broadband at the Virginia Department of Housing and Community Development. And again, making sure you all are in the right webinar. It's the VATI 2022 How to Apply webinar. I hear we're competing with someone else's webinar. I won't mention who, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys are in the right place this afternoon. And as you can see, the meeting will be recorded. And yes, we will be posting both the recording and today's slide deck on our website after today's presentation. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. One, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put your questions in the chat box. We will be having staff man the chat box as well. Second thing, I wanted to introduce our broadband team. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to get to meet everyone on our team. You'll actually get a chance to hear from most of them this afternoon. So I'm gonna make sure I don't miss anybody. I've got my list. So when I say your name on my team, if you can just raise your hand. Desiree Saunders Austin, who has been manning our VATI email box and staying connected and getting onto the webinar this afternoon. She's our admin support and compliance staff. Chandler Vaughn, who is our broadband policy analyst. Also, Tammy Bresky, who is one of our telecommunication and broadband project managers. Tammy, raise your hand. Amar Alamari, who was another of our telecommunication and broadband project managers. Lonnie Hamilton, who is our broadband planner. Caroline Luxhoy, who was a telecommunication and broadband project manager. Tommy Hill, who is our telecommunication manager. And then who's not on the call today is Aaron Barnes, who's our other broadband planner, who is out on military leave. So I just wanted to make sure you all were introduced to our broadband team at DHCD. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Kyle Rosner, who will be welcoming you all this afternoon to the How to Apply webinar. Kyle is the Governor's Deputy Broadband Advisor. Kyle.
Thank you, Tamara. And I want to thank Tamara for her leadership and the entire Office of Broadband for everything that they've done over the past year with all the craziness that's been going on. And I also want to thank all of you who are here today. Just by you being here, that's a huge step, and it shows your commitment to helping connect Virginians. If you're here today, you already know the challenge that the digital divide poses. And if anything good can be taken from the pandemic, it's that we no longer really have to debate about whether broadband is a worthwhile investment. So this was certainly true when looking at the American Rescue Plan Act, which clearly listed broadband as an acceptable use of funding. We are thankful to be in Virginia because we had a head start before a lot of other states, well before the pandemic and all this new funding for broadband. So in 2018, Governor Northam set the goal of universal coverage by 2028. We are well on the way to that goal. Since 2017, we've connected over 140,000 locations, invested over $124 million state money, with a lot more to come in the next 6 months. So, as many of you know, we funded VATI at significant levels over the past 2 years, and Tamara and her team have established the Office of Broadband as well. So on a state level, we're ready, and we hope that all of you here today are ready as well. I know that ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, and all the money that was allocated to states and localities is top of mind. So I want to briefly touch on that. The Commonwealth was allocated $4.3 billion, which will be appropriated by the General Assembly the first week of August. We strongly suspect that a portion of that will go towards broadband. Governor Northam and the leaders of the General Assembly put out their priorities for this money, and broadband was on the list. So if that is the case and a portion of the money is put towards broadband, our goal is to create one entry point for applications. So you don't have to apply for the federal money over here and then apply for VATI over here. So I want everyone to assume that there's going to be more available than the 50 million in VATI. Just go ahead and assume that. In worst case scenario, there's 50 million. And best case scenario, there's well more than that. And regardless, you'll be prepared. For local money, the money that the 3.7 billion that's going to Virginia localities, we would consider, there's a lot of ways. If you are planning on using it for broadband, please talk to our office. But using it as VATI match is a great idea and something that we think could help us fund more projects and help your project be more cost efficient. I want to touch on a few other things before I turn to VATI. The Commonwealth Connect website, which is commonwealthconnect.virginia.gov, is a great resource for everyone who's on here. It has our broadband toolkit for local leaders, which is kind of our one-stop shop that takes you from what is broadband all the way to, hey, let's plan a party. You just got everyone connected. There's also the Virginia Local Broadband Network, and I want to thank Caroline on Tamara's team for putting that together. If you're not a member of VLBN, please let us know. We can sign you up. It's a great resource. And there's a lot more on the website, so I wanted to remind everyone about that. And then I also want to remind folks about the Office of Broadband itself. Please, even if it's outside of VATI, even if you're not eligible for VATI, if it's just something broadband related, our office can be of assistance. We are free consultants. There's engineers, there's planners, there's everybody. There's Tamara. There's everybody you need is on staff there. So please reach out to them. As for VATI, if I can impart one thing on everyone, it's think big. Projects should achieve or be a phase of universal coverage. Don't pursue projects that leave unserved locations without a plan to get them connected. We call that cherry picking. Don't do that anymore. There's enough money on the table where you don't have to. If you are a locality and you don't have a ISP partner who's committed to that vision of universal service, now is the time to find someone who is. And we can help you do that. We can help you put together a solicitation to find a new partner. But all in all, this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity between the record amounts of state investment that are going into broadband and then the astronomical amounts of federal money that are likely to come into broadband. And we have the resources, right, in the next few years to finally solve this. We just need ambitious projects and good local partnerships. And that means you guys who are on the call today. So you're the most critical aspect of all this because you're the ones who actually get the projects together and get people connected. So with that, I want to thank everyone for being here today and making VATI what is a national model for a state broadband grant program. It's truly a collaborative process from the guidelines all the way through the applications, and we couldn't do it without y'all. So thank you again, and really looking forward to the webinar.
Thank you, Kyle. And next, we're going to go ahead and just share with you all today's agenda. As you see, we have a packed agenda this afternoon. We do have some special guests with us that will be joining us from Virginia Community Capital and the Department of Education to talk about some innovative funding for broadband expansion. And then you'll hear from the broadband team on a host of tidbits and tips on how to apply for VATI. So with that, I'm going to go into the first part of the presentation. All right, so I don't know how many folks have not heard about the Office of Broadband by now, but we've been around since September of 2019. And as Kyle said, we're here, we're free consultants to work with you. So we assist communities with broadband planning efforts. We also provide technical assistance to stakeholders on accessing tribal and federal broadband programs. And then what we're here for today is we provide technical assistance and manage the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative, which you'll hear a whole lot about this afternoon. And the last thing, we actually have oversight of the state broadband map. And as you all know, in case you haven't heard, we will be broadband map, I hope later in 2021 with our partners at Virginia Tech. So just stay tuned for more information on our new state broadband map. Next slide, Chandler. All right, so about VATI. Next one. So in case you all don't know, VATI is a program that is established to provide financial assistance to supplement construction costs by private sector providers to extend service to areas that are unserved by any broadband. And as a part of what was agreed upon with the General Assembly this past round through the Broadband Advisory Council is that this year we'll be implementing a one-year pilot program in which public broadband authorities may apply directly for VATI without investment from a private sector. And as you all know, broadband is a priority of Governor Northam, and he set the goal of functional universal coverage back in 2018. And Kyle just shared earlier on some of the successes in terms of reaching that goal of functional universal coverage. And while Kyle kind of let the cat out the bag, not quite a number, right now we know that VATI is proposed at $49.7 million for this round. And the staff will talk a little bit more about the American Rescue Plan throughout the presentation this afternoon. Next slide. So just to give you an update on VATI, and the numbers that Kyle talked about earlier included all state investment, including the Tobacco Commission, as well as the CARES Act. So in terms of VATI, since 2017, we've gotten in 145 applications requesting over $166 million in funding, of which those grants leverage $86 million. That means for every dollar we invested in VATI, the private sector and local government put in slightly more than that. And then through VATI, we've been able to ensure that 78,000 homes, businesses, and anchors now have access to broadband through 47 projects in 56 localities. So just to kind of give you a little information about the last round of VATI, we did receive 45 applications from 53 localities. And I don't think Evan's on with us today, the governor's broadband advisor, but last year he told folks to swing for the fence, and you guys swung for the fence. So last year, around this time last year, we had $19 million for VATI, which ultimately turned into a $50 million budget. But at this time last submitted applications for $105 million in funding, also leveraging $105 million. And then we were able to award $49.2 million in funding, leveraging $52 million with connecting over 24,500 residents, businesses, and community anchors through 16 projects across 27 localities. So if Evan was here, he would say, swing for the fence. I'm going to say swing for the whole United States, because we just don't know how much we'll have invested for this round of VATI, and Kyle talked about that earlier. So I think next am I passing it on to you, Chandler?
Just one more slide on your end.
One more slide on my end. I always forget this map. So guys, the map just shows where we've invested VATI funding since 2017. And I'm pretty sure several localities that are not shaded in on this map are part of this call today. And we're looking forward to hearing from you all. And I'm not going to steal the staff's thunder, so I'm going to be quiet and hand you over to Chandler Vaughn.
Thanks, Tamara. So we thought that before getting into the real meat of the presentation, we wanted to update some folks on the key guideline changes for FY22 round of VATI and what's changed since the last round. So we'll start off by talking about guidelines for eligible areas. In the past, both wireline and wireless projects have allowed up to 10% overlap of existing networks in the project areas. For this year, we're changing that eligible area allowable percentage for wireless projects from 10% to 25%, as you can see in the second bullet. In addition to that, we're also keeping a closer eye on the received signal strength indicators of wireless projects. That's the measurement of the quality of a wireless connection point that a consumer receives. We're capping those wireless passings at -90 decibels per minute. We can talk a little bit about that later, but just wanted to inform folks that that allowable overlap of existing networks for wireless projects has gone from 10% to 25%, and with the goal of keeping that number to as little as possible. We wanted to let folks know that allowable overlap has increased. In addition to the allowable overlap, we've also done some tweaking around shapefile requirements. So applicants for this year will be required to submit point and polygon shape files. The point shape files clearly noting all of the actual passings included in the application, and the polygon shape files showing the general outline of the project area. And within those two, we're also asking wireless applicants to submit information about RSSI, or wireless signal strength for short, in the project area. Same thing on the challenge side. If a internet provider is challenging an application, they'll also be required to submit point and polygon shape files. Wireless challenger is similar with the wireless signal strength indicators. So one of the larger changes for this round of VATI was how our program can better interact with the RDOF auction, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Of course, I'm sure folks are familiar on this call, but the RDOF auction was announced in December of last year, right around the end of the last VATI cycle. And since then, we've been trying to figure out how the RDOF auction and VATI can best interact. So we've landed on a few guidelines here we want to highlight. We'll dive deeper into these later. But if your VATI application does not reach universal coverage in your county, you can include RDOF absolutely in that application. And all those RDOF passings included in the application will be valued at a quarter passing. So looking at the next bullet here, sub-bullet, if that application that does include RDOF can reach universal coverage in a county or region, we'll value those RDOF passings as a half-point value when we're evaluating grant applications. And similar here too, if you have one or two applications and either that one application or the two applications combined reach universal coverage in your county, we'll award you that half-passing value because you're bringing both of those folks to the table to get to universal coverage this round of VATI. And lastly, again, I don't want to harp too much on this because we're going to get into it later, but RDOF areas awarded to any provider, regardless if they're the co-applicant internet provider or not, can be included in the application area. However, if that RDOF winner can challenge that VATI application to claim those areas as truly accepting those RDOF awarded areas, but they must commit to serving those RDOF areas that they challenge within 3 years of the announcement of our awards. And all this is trying to figure out which internet providers are accepting and not accepting RDOF awards. FCC has not finalized those awards yet, and we're hoping that they'll be finalized later this summer, if not early next year. So now I'll turn it over to Caroline, who's going to talk about the VATI application components.
Thanks, Chandler. You can go on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the different VATI application components. However, before I get into that, the first requirement is to submit a notice of application. These notices of application simply inform us that you intend to submit a VATI application this round. These notices are due July 27th by 5 o'clock, and then we will post them publicly on our website by August 3rd. There's a sample notice on page 31 of the guidelines, and submitting a notice is easy. Just email it to the vati@dhcd.virginia.gov email. A couple of things to point out about this notice. Submitting a notice of application does not obligate you to submit a VATI application, nor does it penalize you if you submit one and then later decide not to apply. So if you submit a notice and then later you decide that isn't for you, and you do not submit a VATI application, you will not be penalized in future rounds of VATI funding. However, if you are even remotely considering submitting a VATI application, we strongly suggest that you go ahead and submit your notice of application, so that way you put the check in the box for the requirement and that you are free to apply. So eligible applicants are units of local government, so towns, cities, counties, EDAs and IDA authorities, PDCs, school divisions, and tribal governments. And units of local government must have a private sector provider as their co-applicant. The exception to this is the FY22 pilot project that says public authorities may apply directly for VATI funds without investment from the private sector. These pilot project applications these pilot projects will not exceed 10% of the total VATI funds, and they will be evaluated alongside the other applications. So they do not fall into their own bucket. They will be evaluated amongst all of the applications that we receive. So eligible areas we are defining that by having broadband speeds below 25 by 3, and areas lacking even 10 by 1 will be given significant priority in application scoring. Chandler already spoke about the different allowable overlaps, but just to briefly touch on them again here, for wireline projects, proposed project areas are considered eligible if 10% or fewer passings have access to service with no special construction costs for any provider as of the date of the application. And later in this presentation, Tammy is going to go into further detail about these special construction costs. However, to give some context for this slide, we are defining special construction costs as one-time fees above normal service connection fees required to provide access to the premise. So for example, some of those long drop service connection fees, when a house is maybe significantly and if that length is outside of the normal allowable length of the provider. For wireless projects, a proposed project area is considered eligible if 25% or fewer passings have access, with no special construction costs. And as Chandler mentioned, passings with RSSI below -90 dBm are not eligible to be included in a VATI application. Also, we are strongly encouraging applicants to include those passings and their associated costs that are within the project area that would require special construction costs for low to moderate income residents. So if you already know that your project area has passings, please go ahead and include them and their costs in your application. Okay, so to go through the different components of the application, first we have project description and need, and you can score up to 85 points. Project readiness up to 40 points. Budget and cost appropriateness up to 135 points, and Commonwealth priorities up to 40 points. So the first section of the application is going to be the project description and need. We're looking for an overview of the project area, so please include the project area map as well as the demographics and characteristics. Any existing providers that are already in the area, federal funds that have been awarded to the area. There's a number of different pots of federal funding out there, so please be sure to do your due diligence in researching the area and what may have been awarded there already. Overlap, again, this is what you are anticipating your overlap will be. Again, 10% is the allowable overlap for wireline, 25 for wireless. Your total number of passings. So we have a passings form that we will require you to use. And if you have multiple project areas within one application, we are requiring that you submit a passings form for each project area. And additionally, if you have RDOF passings included in your project, then we have a separate RDOF passings form that you'll need to be using. So if you have both, if you have RDOF passings and non-RDOF passings, then you'll need to be submitting both forms. And then we'll need the project details. So what kind of speeds will be offered, the network design, and how this project either reaches universal coverage or fits into a universal plan. The next section is project readiness. So what's the status of project development? We'll need a timeline and your detailed construction schedule. We'll need organizational experience, and then status of matching funds. We have a funding source table that you'll be required to use here. A reminder, funds cannot exceed 80% of the total cost of the project, and the private sector must provide at least 10% of the match. Additionally, any governmental expenditures that have been incurred after June 17th of 2020 are eligible to be included as match, so long as they were incurred as a result of building this project. So if they were related to the fruition of this project. So any make-ready costs or perhaps any engineering studies that have been done can be included as part of your match for this application. And then leverage. This area often confuses people. So leverage is any non-match cash or non-match in-kind resources that are not eligible or do not qualify as match. So this is where you can include any federal funding that has made this project possible. Perhaps there's been federal funding near the area that is allowing this expansion, or any volunteer labor, or really it's a kind of an opportunity to get a little creative on different resources that you can be using here, again, that would not qualify as match. Then we have your marketing. We are looking for active, not passive marketing. So we're not terribly interested in what the company normally does at a national level. We are looking at how you are going to be marketing to this specific project area. So does that include door hangers or mailbox flyers? Will you be hosting any town hall meetings to directly address this project? Be sure to include your take rate. A number of applications last year simply missed or failed to provide their anticipated, did not score the maximum amount of points in marketing. So please be sure to include that. Also, digital literacy efforts. So digital literacy is different from digital equity. Digital literacy is any programs that have been done or will be done in an effort to promote digital literacy in the area. So please be sure you're talking to your libraries or your schools. Many of them already have these programs in place, so it could be a good opportunity to partner with them and include them in your application. And then finally, just who is your project management team and what role will they be playing? So the next section is budget and cost appropriateness. We need your detailed budget narrative, your derivation of costs, which is pictured here. We have a form for that. And then any supporting cost estimates. So we prefer actual vendor quotes rather than ballpark figures. Okay, so the last section of the application is the Commonwealth Priorities. Within that, we have passings of significant impact. So do you have any businesses or CAIs or other passings that, if they were connected, had a significant impact to the locality or region? Also, we have unique partnerships. So this could be partnerships with any electric utilities or universities or other agencies. And then finally, the digital equity efforts. So again, as opposed to digital literacy, digital equity is any efforts that help to ensure low to moderate income households within the area, within the project area, will have affordable access. And then just a quick note about your attachments. So starting on page 23 of the guidelines, there's a list of required attachments as well as how to label them. So you can see here in number 1, it's just a screenshot of some of the requirements. And number 1, it says label attachment 1, project area map. So your project area map should be titled attachment 1, project area map. Please title it exactly how it is outlined in this list. Also, all attachments must be in PDF form, and all attachments are required. So, for instance, number 2, documentation of federal funding. If your project area has not received federal funding, that doesn't mean you don't have to submit the attachment. So you need to be submitting an attachment that shows there's no federal funding in the area. So again, please, it would be very helpful if you can just follow the list of attachments and make sure that they're labeled and all there. And it just makes for a much smoother process. And I think with that, I'm handing it over to Tommy. I think you're on mute, Tommy.
Yes, you are correct. Thanks, Caroline. We'll repeat that. This is how we go over the section for the Centralized Application Management System, or CAMS as we call it. This picture shows the actual link you will use to access CAM. It is located on the virginiadacd.gov website. Here are some CAMS helpful tips. Refer to the updated CAMS user guide. The user guide is very helpful. Please use that whenever possible. Create your application early. Use as a working document. In other words, go back to it, play with it, dress it up, make sure it's good to go. The unit of local government must submit all required documents. Do not share your password login. Treat this like any other secured account. Staff can be assigned to roles for assistance as needed. Google Chrome is the recommended browser for CAMS, and saved often. Can't stress this enough. Make sure you save. After you complete something, go ahead and hit that Save tab and proceed on to the next section. All right, you'll notice in my slide deck, I have a lot of pictures. That's because I'm a Marine. Marines do better with pictures, and I loaded this thing up with pictures so I can actually explain and do a little show and tell. So this is a picture of the actual example of the organization screen after you have entered all of your data. All right, Chandler. This is the access and application screen. You go here to actually find the program for the Virginia Telecommunication Initiative 2022. Did the same thing you did tomorrow. So that will be VATI 2022 is the program you'll be looking for in this window. This is where you start your application. This is for your project information, organization name, project primary contact information, and project location will go in this screen. Here's your budget window. Here, you want to make sure you enter your budget information precisely. You want to create more than 2 line items so you can have constructions, equipment, admin, et cetera, et cetera. Just a reminder, admin is an eligible expense for VATI. It is often used as a match and not a direct cost. Here's your narrative screen. This is the screen, this is the portion of the actual application that you spend probably the bulk of your time on. Please remember to save. As Caroline was talking about the attachments a minute ago, make sure your attachments are named as they are in the guidelines. Make sure your attachments are in PDF form and your shape files are zipped. Freedom of Information Act. Applications submitted through CAMS must only indicate or include information that is open to the public. Applicants may request to submit supplementary information to the application that includes a FOIA exemption pursuant to, for information related to the grant application that may make the application more competitive. FOIA exemption requests must be sent directly to the VATI DHCD website, or to our email. Yeah, you understand. To VATI at dhcd.virginia.gov. Applicants wishing to submit multiple FOIA exemption requests for multiple VATI applications must do so individually in separate requests. The applicant shall make a written request to the department invoking such exclusions upon submission of data or other materials for which protection from disclosure is sought. Identifying with specificity of the data, information, or materials for which protection is sought, and stating the reason why protection is necessary. Do not submit any documents until DHC has provided a written determination. In other words, do not send us anything until we have, don't send us any documents until you have requested FOIA exemption for the stated documents. CAM's helpful tips. Submit to DHCD by 11:59 p.m. on September 14th, 2021. DHCD staff will not be available after 5 p.m. You must use CAMs. Include all required attachments. Please pay attention to the naming nomenclature of attachments and file types. So that's probably the third time we said something about the actual naming of the files. So that's probably pretty important, right? So let's make sure we all name the files properly, use the proper type of files, and make sure you submit your application. Applications that are not submitted will just sit there and no one will know they exist. Applications need to be submitted after they're completed. I think at this point, I'll return it over to Tammy.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm going to touch on common application mistakes. Then I'm going to turn it over to Lonnie for universal projects and mapping. Chandler's going to get the navigating art off. You'll get back to me for special construction charges, and then back to Chandler for American Rescue Plan funding. So on to the next slide. Some common application missteps. CAMs not being set up in CAMs. We want to make sure you're set up in CAMs right away. So double check to make sure you do have a profile. That if you can't get into CAMs, you can't submit an application. Defining and setting up roles correctly. We have an awesome user's guide that has been updated and provides a lot more information. Certain roles are able to do everything in CAMs. Other roles are only able to upload information in CAMs, and then somebody else has to submit it. And then if you create somebody outside your organization as a consultant, just please be aware that they can see all of your applications in CAMs, even for different projects for other funding sources. So that's something you guys have to think about internally, but that user guide can tell you what each of the roles does. And again, very important, Google Chrome is the preferred browser. If you try to use Internet Explorer or Mozilla, you will get errors or it will not save information correctly. So we want to make sure that you guys, don't do all this work and then have it disappear on you. So for the application itself, not answering the questions. Some of these questions are multi-part questions, and they might ask two things. The biggest one, and it's already been touched upon, is the marketing and take rate are in a question together. A lot of times we got the answer to marketing and not the take rate, or we got the take rate and not the marketing. So make sure that you reread the question, make sure you answer what the questions are asking for. Another common issue has been not understanding the question. Caroline has already touched on the definitions, especially of match versus leverage and digital equity versus digital literacy. If you're not sure, reach out to us. That is what the team is here for. We're here to answer any questions you may have. So if you're not understanding what we're actually asking in that question, please ask us, because we've seen this, these questions quite a few times, so we all know what it's supposed to say. Sometimes, somebody new coming in new to it may misread it or read it a different way and not 100% sure. Ask us. That's, that's what we're here for. We don't want you to not get points because you didn't understand what we were asking for. Not providing required information and or attachments. Hit on that a couple of times too. Except for where we require something for a wireless project and not a wireline project, all attachments are required. And I think I'll be touching on this the 4th or 5th time. The importance of labeling the attachments. That is very important on our end, that your attachments are labeled correctly. And with the exception of the shape files, they should be all in PDF format. Please do not attach Excel sheets in the attachments, because if we try to convert it to PDF, we may not realize that it's a workbook instead of a worksheet, and we may be missing an important part of your project. So that's the tips there. Next page, please, Chandler. All right, tips and tricks to avoid missteps. First thing I'm going to suggest to you, if you're even thinking about putting in an application, create one. That gives our team an idea that you are interested in applying for the VATI grant. This way we can also eventually reach out if we haven't heard from you and say, do you need help? So by creating that application, it puts you on our radar so that we can reach out to you and see if you need any assistance. We'll also probably send you a follow-up about the notice of application, because as Caroline said, you can put that notice of application in, you can create an application in CAMS. Just because you create it doesn't mean you have to submit it, but it gives us an insight as to, can we help you in some way? When you go into CAMS, you will see the questions ahead of time, and you'll actually see the questions on the user guide. I'm going to suggest creating a Word document to write your prompts on there. That way you can copy and paste them over into CAMS. But when you are in CAMS, again, probably about the 10th million time you've heard this, is save often. Do not move from one page to another without saving. Write a paragraph, save. But by having it on the Word document, if something were to happen, you won't lose everything you just wrote. But be careful when you are copying over, because if you copy in returns and blank spaces, especially if you are a Mac user, it will create some sort of wingdings and other random lines. A 100-page document becomes a 1,000-page application just because of spaces in there. So there's ability to download your application before you submit it. Click the download and it will pop up and show you what your application will look like to us. Really stressing out, reach out for technical assistance as often as necessary. You are not a bother to us. This is what we are here for. If you want to wait and put 2 or 3 questions together, or one question at a time as you're going through the application, that's what we're here for. Reach out to us. We'll answer your questions. You're not a bother. Don't feel like you're a bother. We're here to help you. And 4 of us, 6 of us, 8 of us, 10 of us, however many there are of us nowadays, we're all here to help you. Another thing is have somebody who's not familiar with the application review it. Again, I know when I write stuff, I either have to sit and walk away from it and reread it, or I do give it to somebody else to reread so that they can understand, do they understand what I'm saying? Did I convey myself correctly? So if you have somebody who's not familiar with the application reviewing it, they might be able to sit there and say, hey, I don't understand what you mean by this. So you can figure out, do you need to reword it, or is it more of a technical thing and it's fine the way it is? But by having an extra set of eyes on this, it will help you guys submit the best application that you can. And then, yeah, I already talked about test run the application PDF prior to submitting it. And then the primary applicant must click submit. Every year we have 1 or 2 people who maybe have a consultant upload the questions. The consultant can't hit the submit button. The primary applicant must hit that submit button. So I know everybody wants to take as much time as possible to not rush and complete these applications. But, you know, try to get it in. You know, you can submit it early if you are, you know, if you feel you have the best application out there. But just don't forget to hit submit, because then again, it you know, doesn't show up on our radar. And, you know, I'm going to stress this as often as possible. You know, technical assistance, that's what we're here for. Please reach out to us. And so at this time, I'm going to pass it on, I believe, next to Lonnie.
Hello, yes. My name is Lonnie Hamilton. I'm one of the planners who do mapping as well. We're going to talk about universal projects and mapping. So universal, we're really pushing universal projects and universal coverages here. And so it can be kind of a process to get there. We recommend first reaching out to your incumbent providers in your locality and trying to get an idea of where they might serve now and if they're planning on expanding anytime soon. I say that fully recognizing that very often the provider won't tell you where they serve because they consider that very secretive proprietary information. But if they know that, you know, there's a potential expansion partnership as an option going forward, they might be a little bit more forthcoming. Kind of going hand in hand with that, you also want to see who's wanting any federal broadband funding in your area and contact them. Sometimes it'll be the same provider that you just spoke to. Sometimes it'll be a provider that isn't yet in your locality. But knowing where that funding is and what program is a part of and the timelines associated with that, standards associated with that, gives you an idea of where you can start with broadband funding. And if you're not sure what programs to look for or who to get in contact with about that, that's something we can help with. And so you want to then, looking at where you maybe know a provider already serves, or you know that some providers have funding, you want to start to try and look in those gaps and figure out which areas of your locality are actually unserved. This could be one of the hardest parts of putting together a project, and so planning work is recommended. That is something we can help with, and there's always the broadband toolkit available. Kyle mentioned it earlier. It's a step-by-step guide. It's very nice and easy to read. I highly recommend it. But as you plan for these universal projects, make sure that no one's left behind. You know, we've already talked about cherry picking. With as much money as there is right now, there's no reason to leave anyone unserved because it'll just be harder to serve them later with the economics of it. And make sure to leverage that ARPA funding if you have it and if it's available, because it makes great match for VATI, or it also makes it for its own good funding for a broadband project. Excellent. Perfect. So I'm going to go over 2 examples of localities that are working towards or have worked towards universal coverage that kind of shows you the way it can get done. King and Queen County actually won a grant from VATI, which is VATI's predecessor. It was a planning grant. And so they used that to identify, you know, areas of the county that were unserved and providers that could help them get them there. Shortly after that, the CAF2 program, that is a federal program, was awarded. Everyone in green on that map was awarded that funding. And so the county knew that broadband was going to come there at some point in the near future, and they knew who to talk to about that. So they talked to the provider in question there, and they worked out a VATI application for the orange area, the southern part of the county, because they knew that it was unserved. And in the time it took them to start building out that project, the RF program came out. That is the gray areas of that map. And then they knew that they had most of the county covered. There were just some leftover gaps, which they finally filled with the second VATI project just last year. And now King and Queen has made it to universal coverage with a combination of planning, state money, and federal funding. Next slide. However, you don't necessarily need federal funding to get there. Montgomery County, for example, doesn't have any federal funding in it, but what they did have was planning. In their case specifically, they used a consultant to come up to draw up this plan. However, you don't necessarily need one, and we have plenty of assistance available. But they were able to identify the areas of their county that are both unserved and underserved and map them effectively. And from there, they've started to fill in those gaps with VATI projects and CARES Act projects to kind of get the county the rest of the way to universal coverage. And so having that plan is fundamentally important. It'll help your VATI application a lot to help you get to universal coverage. Next slide. Part of the VATI application requires you to submit maps. The maps need to be detailed and legible. This map, for example, I don't know where this is. It's really unclear. It's generally understood that the green is probably a signal propagation, but I don't know what the red circle means or the red parts of the signal. I also don't know where this is. So that's the kind of detail that can be really helpful. Next slide. Compared to this is another wireless map. This shows you exactly where a tower is, the different propagations from the various equipment pieces on the tower, the passings that are covered by, and what's in the area as well. That is a lot more useful for us to get a good idea of where this project is going. Next slide. Wireline maps too. This one needs more detail. There was some more detail attached to it. This is just a smaller screenshot of it. But the problem here is, while we can see where the fiber lines are going, we don't necessarily have the other context. So I don't know if there are areas between these roads that need service, or if they have service, or if anyone lives there or not. And so that makes it hard to get a good idea of if this region is going to be completely covered or if there are still gaps left over afterwards. Next slide. This map, on the other hand, shows us all the streets and houses in the area, and it even goes into detail about who has 10/1 service versus no broadband service at all. It gives us a much better idea of, okay, there's no one being left behind in this project area, and we know that this area will be covered and served after the fact. Next slide. We talked about our new shapefile requirement. This is for applicants and challengers, and this is so that we can have very highly accurate data on where these projects are going, and we can make sure that they're eligible. Shapefiles should be submitted in a .shp format. This is the kind of default that ArcGIS uses. They need to be functional and usable, and please submit them in a zip folder. If you don't submit them in a zip folder, CAMs will be very upset. Trust us, we tried. The various formats that you need to submit it in, you need polygons for showing the general project areas. These polygons should all be in a single layer. The polygons themselves should have attribute data telling us the project area name, as well as the number of passings within it. We are also requiring point shape files that will be a single layer with points representing each address in the project area, and each address should have the address data attached to it in the attribute data. And for wireless providers who are either submitting an application or challenging, we are also requiring RSSI heat maps. These should be a raster shapefile at a resolution of about 1/4 miles, what we've decided on right now, and there should be one of those available for each wireless tower. And I think that should be it. Back to you, Chandler.
Yep, thanks, Lonnie. So we want to take a little bit more time to unpack the RDOF auction. I think Lonnie did do justice to saying that any locality's goal, county or region wide, should be to achieve universal coverage, and he unpacked what that meant. But a good way to do that is through bringing in RDOF areas to your VATI application. And just to take a step back, the RDOF auction, Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, announced by the FCC, the timeline for build out for RDOF locations starts from the time those internet providers get under contract with the FCC, which will be in early 2022, we think. So if an RDOF area is not brought into VATI, the worst case scenario is that those areas aren't connected or provided broadband access until 6 years from then. So we're looking at early 2028 if those areas aren't accelerated in some way, shape, or form. So VATI will provide an avenue for that this year in a couple of different ways. You can do the traditional sense of filling in with a VATI application those pockets of service that are still left unserved around RDOF, but you could bring those RDOF areas into your VATI application that will then require those RDOF areas, if the application is approved, to be built out in the same time of the VATI application. So of course that would involve partnering with the RDOF awardee to reach all the other areas that are unserved in your locality, with one exception that we'll get into in a second. So to unpack the scoring, we talked about quarter passing values, half passing values. Just to dive into that a little bit, if you include an RDOF passing in your application, but that application does not get to universal coverage, nor does it get it to universal coverage in combination with multiple applications this cycle, you'll only get a 1/4 point valuation for those RDOF passings. But if that application that includes RDOF gets to universal coverage, or is one of 2 or 3 applications that come in this cycle, and combined those 2 or 3 applications get to universal coverage, those RDOF passings will be valued at a half point in our scoring criteria. And what that looks like is at the bottom. You can see that you'll net 100 more passings there in that scenario by having an application that reaches universal coverage. And that'll help you in one of 2 ways. One, having more passings in an application will help scoring, but also, getting more technical here, you're also scored pretty heavily on cost per passing in terms of what the state cost per passing is, which is your total request for VATI funds divided by your number of passings in your application. Simple math, you increase the number that you're dividing that large request by, it's going to be a lower requested cost per passing overall. And that also provides an opportunity to include some of the cost that's going to take to reach those RDOF areas, which we know weren't funded at the level that it's needed to build out to those areas with just RDOF funding. So looking at this in a real world example, Emporia, which is surrounded by Greenville County. Greenville County has 2 RDOF winners in the county. And if Greenville, if you're on, congratulations, you're going to receive some free help. But looking at this map, the bottom half of the map in the blue area was awarded to Charter or Spectrum operationally in the RDOF auction. Everything north in the green was awarded to the Rural Electric Co-op Consortium, which is Empower or Mecklenburg Electric Cooperative as their parent company. So in this sense, it might make sense for Greenville County to partner with Empower in the top half where they have the RDOF award. And then also in this application cycle with VATI, submit a separate application with Charter to serve that bottom half of the county. And that makes sense because if you bring those RDOF areas in, you're accelerating that potential 6-year build out into the time frame of the VATI application, which is usually 18 months. In the same sense, if you're able to bring in both of those partners to the table in 2 separate applications that both respectively get to universal coverage in the area, you'll get the highest available points for universal coverage. So I see in the chat box here, we might as well take a pit stop and answer this one. Will you please explain how RDOF areas are covered by satellite are scored? Great question. Thanks for asking. I didn't hit on that earlier. Satellite broadband, as considered by VATI guidelines, is not considered broadband. So any RDOF areas that were awarded to satellite broadband providers can be included in VATI applications, just like it's any other unserved area in the Commonwealth. So we heard from a lot of folks, and we know ourselves, that these RDOF decisions and contract obligations have not gone final yet with the FCC. We don't think they're going to go final until early 2022. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there on whether or not a provider may or may not be accepting their RDOF award come early next year. So the guidelines read that any RDOF area awarded to any provider can be included in a VATI application. Now, let's say that you have an RDOF provider, you submit a VATI application in that RDOF area, but your co-applicant internet provider is not that RDOF awardee. So if you do that, that RDOF awardee can challenge your VATI application to come out and say and state officially, hey, I intend to accept this RDOF area, do not build into my RDOF with your VATI application. If the challenge is deemed successful, we'll remove that area from the application. But if that's done, that RDOF awardee has to pledge they'll serve that area within 3 years of the announcement of this year's VATI cycle. And then lastly, this is most for the ISPs in the room, virtual room. For the co-applicants that receive VATI funding for the RDOF areas, that internet provider has to enter into an agreement with DHCD to accelerate their RDOF milestones outside of the VATI awarded area. So for example, and just to get into the weeds a bit here, RDOF winners are required to build out to 40% of their award statewide within the first 3 years of that contract starting early next year, and then 20% in each year thereafter. So 60% in year 4, 80% in year 5, 100% in year 6. So if we accelerate an RDOF award as a part of a VATI application, but we don't require any outside acceleration, we've only helped that RDOF contract reach those first passing obligations, and we haven't paid attention to those folks that are still going to be connected potentially in years 4, 5, and 6. So here in the example scenario below, we explain what this looks like in practice. If an ISP won 1,000 RDOF locations, they had to complete 40% of those, 400 by year 3 anyways. If 200 of those are accelerated because of VATI and they're included in a VATI application, the ISP must enter into a contract with DHCD to complete 600 passings, which are outside of the VATI area, could be outside of the VATI, or at least 400 would be, by year 3, barring any contract extensions, of course, with extenuating circumstances. So for here, I'll turn you back over to Tammy to talk about special construction costs.
All right, thanks, Chandler. So special construction costs means different things to different people, but this is how we've defined it. A special construction cost is a one-time fee above normal service connection fees required to provide broadband access to a premise, i.e. service connection drop fee for serviceable units beyond the ISP's set standard length or required non-standard equipment. So what does that mean? So for the wireline, we use a lot of times we use the term long drop. So maybe ISPA charges a $200 service connection fee, and they say we will go 250 feet from the edge of the road with the drop to the house or the premise, and anything but beyond that will cost you X number of dollars. That X number of dollars is what we're referring to as that special construction cost. So what we're here looking for is for you guys to try to include these special construction cost areas, especially for low to moderate income, as part of your application. Because otherwise you'll pass them going down the road and they don't have that digital equity to be able to get to connect to the service because of that additional special construction cost. On the wireless side, again, you might have a service connection fee of, $300 that includes the router and the antenna on the roof, but maybe this customer is in a location that they need additional equipment such as a repeater on their roof. That is a special construction charge that is above and beyond a normal charge that you charge all of your customers. So again, that special construction charge could be incorporated and absorbed as part of this VATI application. Because we don't want you passing anybody by. Say you're going down the road with a wireline project and there's a private road with 3 or 4 houses down there. Well, as the provider, you decided it's not on your ROI, and if those 3 houses want it, it's going to cost them $10,000. Again, that's a special construction charge because it's above and beyond what you would normally charge the customer. Look at including those into your applications. Again, if you're not sure what we mean by this, set up a call, set up a chat with us so we can hear what situations you might have and figure out, is it a special construction charge? Is it part of the actual application? And what are some options and ideas that can be done to make sure that we are not leaving passings behind? Because those passings are going to get harder and harder to pay for as these projects grow and grow throughout the area. And that's kind of what all I have on special construction charges at this time. So I believe, Chandler, we're going back to you.
Yep, promise you'll get rid of me after this section. So we want to take some time to talk about American Rescue Plan funding and VATI, and that'll start with the State Fiscal Recovery Fund. So Kyle talked about this earlier, swing for the fences. But the State Fiscal Recovery Fund is $4.3 billion that will be coming to the state of Virginia and then appropriated by the General Assembly and the governor in a special session in early August. So We have a hint towards that broadband deployment is a shared priority because in a memo released in early May, Governor Northam and General Assembly leaders clearly said that a priority of theirs, a shared priority, is to accelerate broadband deployment across the Commonwealth. And Kyle mentioned it at the beginning, but for folks that may have joined, our goal here is that if the General Assembly approves funding for VATI, which we think they will, and we hope they will, there'll be one door to come in for funding, for VATI funding, as well as the state dollars that may be allocated to broadband. And like Tamara was saying earlier, for this round, we have $50 million available, 49.7, through state funding in the state budget. But in years past, we've heard that folks have kind of limited their request to thinking that, well, doggone it, I can only get 10%, 15%, maybe even 20% of this $50 million pot for my project. We're really encouraging folks to shy away from that kind of thinking this year. Don't consider it as a $50 million limitation and you should only ask for a quarter of that if you've got a big application this cycle. Think bigger than the $50 million pot because we're hopeful that more funding can be allocated through the State Fiscal Recovery Fund. So in addition to the state fund, there's also the local fiscal recovery fund. And this is the funding that's coming to local governments, counties and cities across the state, $3.7 billion total. And expanding broadband access is an eligible expense. It's the same exact guidelines as the State Fiscal Recovery Fund. So what we're suggesting folks do with this money is add it as matching dollars to a VATI application. Because this is discretionary spending and your boards and councils and elected bodies can choose how to spend it, as long as it fits into the guidelines, we're considering local fiscal recovery fund dollars as matching funds to a VATI application. That's the key way to climb our score sheet is by cost efficiency, right next to being a universal application. So those dollars, again, can be used as match to a VATI application. But if you do that, just make sure that your VATI application is also meeting those local fiscal recovery fund guidelines. So lastly, again, just to drive a couple points home before we go into the next section of the presentation, this is a once-in-a-generation investment in broadband. We really are encouraging folks to get it done now. We hear a lot of things in the press cycle about the next big infrastructure package that's going to come down. Well, we can't really count on anything that we hear about until it's actually passed and in the account at the local level, right? So we're encouraging folks to, shy away from that kind of thinking. This problem can be solved in the next big infrastructure bill. Let's get it done now with a combination of VATI, these state dollars, and local dollars that are already on the table in the account. So the next thing would be to take some time when you're designing these projects. The CARES Act really trained us to get funds out of the door in under 12 months. But with these guidelines, we have until December of 24 to obligate those funds, and then December of 26 to spend them. And then at a minimum, we're encouraging folks just to wait before you launch a broadband expansion project until you see how much the General Assembly devotes to broadband. Then you can frame your broadband contributions around those. So with that, we're kind of pivoting now to outside of the Office of Broadband, but to a couple of innovative funding streams for broadband expansion. First, we've got Virginia Community Capital, and then we'll hear from the Department of Education. So now I'll turn it over to Wayne Waldrop with Virginia Community Capital.
Yes, I'm here, Chandler. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, very good. First, I want to thank Chandler and Tamara for giving us an opportunity to speak to this group. Just like DHCD and all of you, VCC is very interested in supporting the expansion of broadband statewide. So I want to do a quick introduction to Virginia Community Capital. We are a Virginia-based community development financial institution. We also own a for-profit FDIC state chartered bank. As a CDFI, we are a nonprofit that's directed by our board of directors. And some of you will know that Bill Shelton, formerly with DHCD, is on our board and actually was vital in creating our company 15 years ago when Governor Warner was governor. We had an initial $15 million capitalization, and that has grown now to $34 million, $340 million in assets. We've got a legal lending limit of 7.5, and we expect to get some additional money at the end of the year, some additional equity, and we believe that legal lending limit will be closer to 15 million by the fourth quarter. We're a good fit to provide some funding gap money. We're an innovative provider of capital. We tend to look at things a little bit differently because we are focused on a lot of the communities that are on this call, both rural and urban, but mainly underserved. And we do know that the expansion of broadband would improve the quality of life for everybody. Now, listed there are some of the loan types that we do, and you may have heard of us in various other projects around the state. Next slide. Just in the way of background, especially in some of these gap areas that we're talking about, we do believe that some of the ISPs will be small businesses. Some, of course, will be electric cooperatives and other authorities. Those larger ISPs won't have the same financing challenges, but as you are trying to fill smaller markets or gaps maybe within larger markets, you may find a smaller ISP to fit the bill better. We're happy, of course, that the grants that we're talking about today are available. There are a number of grants, as you all know, but in many cases they are reimbursable. And so what we are doing, they still might not fund all the financing gaps. So an ISP, especially smaller one, may not have the capital resources they need to really start an expansion project, and grant dollars might not be enough. I've included some of the examples of some of the smaller ISPs that I know are out there. Next slide, Chandler. We would view the ISPs like a standard small business. Typically, we look for, and this is pretty standard within the banking world, we would look for companies that have been in business for 2 years. One of the things that we look at is going to be cash flow coverage. And in its simplest form, that means net profits would cover loan payments. We generally look for that to cover 1.2 times. If the cash flow is based on projections, we look for a higher coverage because that's a much higher risk sort of loan. We're talking about passings here today. And so it's great that we want to maximize the number of passings, but at the end of the day, what the projections are going to be based on is how many of those passings actually buy the service. So, that's, we study that, we research that. That's kind of what y'all do. And many times, especially in the early years, some of that is still optimistic. As any bank would look at, if the cash flow isn't there, they're going to look for collateral. You can imagine that once the equipment is put into service, it really does not have any value to a bank. I'm old enough to remember when cable was being put around in various markets too, very similar sort of structure. Once you put that equipment in the ground or on a pole or on a satellite, if a bank has to sell it, it's not worth nearly how much it costs. Next slide. So when we think about credit considerations of an ISP, we're going to look at the amount of equity that's already in the deal, and the more the leverage, of course, the higher the financial risk and the smaller room for error. So that means you really have to be very accurate on the absorption of your customers with the passings. Many of the ISPs will be small businesses. In some cases, we would look at, do they have the management capacity to handle this sort of expansion? As I mentioned before, revenue projections are based on kind of the best estimate of the market's willingness to buy the services. And unfortunately, the capital investment is largely fixed up front. Sometimes you build it and they will come, and sometimes you build it and they don't come. And so we have to look at both of those scenarios. And I've already talked about the value of equipment once it's been put into service. So the next slide talks about a way that we can work with the localities and work with the ISPs to fund some of these gaps. And we have used this structure many times before across the state for traditional economic development projects with new companies moving into town. If the ISP does not have the equity or the ability to get a loan on its own, which of course we would love for an ISP to contact us, and if they have the historical cash flow, that's awesome. But if they don't, and the county still wants to support broadband expansion without going through any sort of general obligation or putting their name on it, then we have structured loans in the past through the EDA or IDA with a moral obligation of the county to cover any cash flow shortfalls in the loan. The proceeds of the loan that we would lend to the EDA would then be lent by the EDA to the ISP. And so we would structure the repayment of our loan from the EDA at the same terms that the EDA structured their loan to the ISP. So the next chart and diagram kind of explains how this would actually work. So you can see, starting from the left, VCC would lend the money to the IDA EDA. The county would give VCC a moral obligation. The IDA EDA then lends the money to the ISP. So the ISP then is making payments back to the EDA IDA, and then the IDA EDA then sends those payments back to us to cover the loan. They're almost like a pass-through if the ISP is successful and it works. The ISP then provides, of course, services to the broadband clients who pay a fee to pay a fee to the ISP to ultimately give them a return on their investment. So that's generally how the financing structure works. We have done something very similar on traditional economic development projects across the state, and this seems to work very well. So if anybody is interested in ISP or a EDA and talking about it, I would love to catch up with one or two people on this line right now and pursue some of it. I would love to have a couple of prototype transactions that we could actually fund and commit to, so that we could show others on the call that this structure actually does work in the right situation. So just an alternative financing source for you in the right situation, and you can contact me directly. I have lenders that cover the entire state, so we can cover any locality. So thank you. And now, Chandler, I don't know if we take questions now or if people will just contact me offline with questions. I'd be delighted to answer them.
Wayne, if you're able to stay on, I don't know if you have the time to stay on, but certainly, I mean,
Yeah.
we'll publish the slide deck and then folks will have your email that way, but I'm sure we can hang out here on this slide just in case folks haven't written down that. But I do want to introduce the next innovative funding source through the Department of Education is Susan Clare. So Susan, are you on the line?
Yes, Chandler.
All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know there's a lot of information being, coming at you today. So my slides are pretty brief. And if you need additional information about the Emergency Connectivity Fund, please contact me. And also, I have a more comprehensive 2 or 3 pager that I sent to Tamara, and she can get it out if you have additional questions about this Emergency Connectivity Fund. This is not the E-rate program, which I am the state E-rate coordinator here at the Virginia Department of Education. But I provide outreach and support to our 132 school divisions in Virginia related to network infrastructure and broadband. So this is a new initiative, this Emergency Connectivity Fund. And the main purpose is to meet the remote learning needs of students, school staff, and library patrons. Next slide, Chandler. This emergency connectivity fund is approximately 7.17 billion is available again to connect remote learners. Over the past year, our school divisions have done a lot of work in this area very quickly to equip students with computing devices and internet access in the form of hotspots and other types of connectivity. And my dream is that the localities will work in collaboration with our school division technology leaders and superintendents and their team to make this connectivity happen in Virginia for all Virginians. But the DOE's focus is really on, connectivity out to the students, making sure we get that done, and we can get it done through these various funding streams. This emergency connectivity fund is 100% reimbursable costs, which is a lot different than E-rate. E-rate's a discount program based on number of students on free and reduced lunch. This, however, is a little different. School divisions and libraries do not have to pay any money. They just have to purchase their equipment services that they need. So the eligible equipment is Wi-Fi hotspots, data plans, modems, routers, computing devices. Those computing devices include tablets, such as iPads and computer laptops. Also, satellite is also eligible. There is a limited exception for network construction, for wired and wireless. I see a connection between some of these different funding streams that we've been talking about on this call and this limited exception here. So if localities, if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to contact your locality school division technology leader to discuss this further. There's no competitive bidding requirements for ECF, but however, schools and libraries must comply with state and local bidding requirements. Next slide, Chandler. So the prospective window meaning that schools and libraries can start applying for the ECF funds June 29th at noon. This first window is to schools and libraries can request any of their prospective eligible services or equipment that they need going forward. And then that window closes on August 13th, 2021. And there's a stipulation that if the money remains, a retroactive window will be open to reimburse eligible purchases that were made from March 1st, 2020 through June 30th. So that means that if a school division, for example, I was just talking to Rockingham County this morning, they spent about $60,000 over the last year in Wi-Fi hotspots and computing devices for students to support remote learning. So they'd like to recoup that money, and they can recoup the money as long as it was spent with local funds if that retroactive window opens after the prospective window. There's the website there if you want to learn more about it. Chandler, I do have to jump off of this call and catch another one, but if anybody needs my email, you have it. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. We really appreciate it. And I've put your email information in the comment box.
Thanks.
So now I'm going to turn it back over to Tamara for our next steps and a Q&A session.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to get off of mute. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over. I know Amar was helping me with answering questions, and so what I want to do is actually go back to the chat box and want to remind folks to put your questions in there. And then for our friends on the phone who cannot see the chat box, I'm going to quickly go through the window and repeat the questions that were asked and the answer that we provided. And I do know that there was I know there was a Russ Rice that had his hand raised. I'm not sure if he still wants to ask a question, but Russ, you'll be able to ask your question at that point as well. All right, so our first question actually was from Joyce, and Joyce said, is the applicant the county? She's saying the applicant is the county. Are providers not willing to provide us the addresses? Should we require the addresses of our provider to create the shape files and know the remaining that we'll need to serve? My response to Joyce was, we might want to talk offline to get a better understanding of the issue and why the private provider is not willing. So that was our answer. A question from Ed Moran was, is the RSSI value for wireless measured over a period of time, say 24 hours? Then Ed had a second question, are notices of application public information? So regarding the RSSI question, Amar responded, RSSI is the anticipated expected signal level and determined during the design process. It is not measured over time. It is usually done through a radio frequency software. And then there was a subsequent question that I think Amar answered. I'll go ahead and answer the public information question regarding the notice of application. As you all heard earlier, Caroline said the notices will be posted to our website, so that makes them public information. So yes, all notices of application are public information, and DHCD will post them to their website. Anyone that submits a notice of application is not required to post it locally. We are encouraging anyone that's interested in understanding who may be submitting an application, we are directing them to the VATI web page. All right. There was a second question regarding won't the RSSI vary based on user load? And Amar's response was, RSSI varies depending on many factors such as the antenna's frequency used, bandwidth, and obstacles. So basically, if you all have any specific technical questions, definitely reach out to the team. I think by now you all know the answer. vati@dhcd.virginia.gov is our email address for you all to submit questions. Let's see, there was another question. Dan Witt asks, will DHCD staff review the application for completeness prior to submittal if requested? And we responded that it is the applicant's responsibility to make sure that all questions are answered and that the details are complete. However, we can explain the questions and explain what we are looking for. Tammy talked about that during her portion of the presentation. And please, please, please remember, you can get technical assistance as you develop your application. And then Brian, actually, Chandler answered this question during his portion of the RDOF presentation, but there was a question to explain how RDOF areas are covered by satellite. And why is my phone ringing? Sorry. Or explain how RDOF areas are covered by satellite are scored. And then there were two questions regarding special construction costs. One was if we have a plan for those special construction costs, even if we haven't determined if a household wants service. VATI does require a 10% retainage of the grant award. So we ask that folks build into their budget for low mod income residents so that if they eventually subscribe for service, you can get reimbursed from the retained funds for those costs to cover those properties. And then Bill Newberg asked the question again about special construction costs. Do you need to know the address or can you have a pool of dollars based on the home pass? So what we recommend is that we expect either the applicant or co-applicant to do their due diligence in their application and have an understanding of the premises passed in the project area. It would be best if you do have the addresses at application. However, if you don't, at least have the number of homes that would need special construction costs to have access to service. Again, we retain 10% of the grant for projects. So as you know, you're required to report, in case you don't know, subscriber data at closeout and then 6 months and 12 months post-contract completion. So the retained funds can be used once the folks subscribe for service to cover the cost of those special construction fees. I know Russ had his hand up earlier. Is Russ Rice still on the call? And do you still have a question? All right, I'm going to take that silence as he's not on the call anymore. No longer has a question. Does anyone that called in have any questions at this time? If you're talking, you may still be on mute. All right, does anyone that actually is on the video call have any questions? Last chance for questions. But again, you still have the option to submit questions to the VATI email address, which is vati@dhcd.virginia.gov. Okay, so before we close out our webinar this afternoon, the application officially goes live today. You also have the questions in our VATI guidelines as well. Tammy and Tommy both talked about saving often as you're working through CAMS. Maybe start the application in Word and copy it into CAMS. So the application officially opens today. One, I would be remiss if I did not say another quote from Evan. This is an open book test. We are here to help you as you all work through the application. So please continue to reach out to our team. Today and the days before this officially started our VATI technical assistance sessions. So please reach out to us to schedule a phone call, or at this point, some folks are meeting in person. So if you guys want to meet with us, please let us know to have a project development session. The notice application is due on July 27th and we'll be posting them on August 3rd. Applications are due September 14th, and we'll post them to our website. You see the remainder of the schedule regarding challenges and notifying folks the challenges and rebuttals and all that fun stuff around the challenge process. But the big thing is we anticipate an announcement of our awards in the month of December. Let me see, anything else? I think I got everything. Again, please remember to submit a notice of application. It is okay, as the team said, if you end up not submitting a full application. We must have a notice of application in hand for every application that is submitted. And again, any questions, vati@dhcd.virginia.gov. So with that, I don't think I forgot anything. Definitely, if you have questions from VCC, we will be sharing that information from today's presentation. The slide deck will be shared and the recording will be posted to the VATI website. I can't promise you that it will be posted shortly. Tomorrow is a state holiday. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the webinar, and the VATI application goes live today. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you for attending our 2022 VATI How to Apply webinar.
Thank you.